Good evening. So we're starting into week two. The way I'm going to start this though is the first thing we had some questions. It's probably my fault. We got a little ahead of ourselves in terms of the homework. Some of that stuff with future values, present values. Um, I didn't spend a great deal of time on it. We'll spend a little bit more time on it tonight. But my point with it is that it's not um, the calculation part of that is not the critical element of personal finance. What I don't want, or what you don't want, is to be consumed with math and come up with answers and not um, you know be able to keep track of the bigger picture of calculating interest and the effect it will have on you. Um, so what I'm looking for, and what's important to you, I believe, is that you realize just how big of effect interest rate and particular compound interest rates can have on your ability to save, or your sometimes your spending that gets out of control due to interest rates. So um, the way interest rates and the way present values and future values and all these things that are related to calculations that involve interest rates, that's all changed. There used to be days where people would jump in and they have, tables, and they'd pull out these factors that they really had no idea why they worked, and it was just kind of magic, and they did that, and it's not a good way to approach personal finance. Now, due to computers and we don't even talk about calculators really anymore. Just the processing type stuff. It's so much more powerful and so much more intuitive, and it allows you to keep track of of the numbers. And when you look at something, it should appear reasonable, and your answer should not be, that's just the answer that was given to me because that's what the table said. So anyway, I'll try to simplify this out a little bit if I can. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to review last week's homework. So last week's homework and this week's homework, I'm just going to repeat it since we didn't do a great job on explaining that. It was kind of overwhelming, but fair enough. Let me get back to that slide. Golly, why does it not want me to do that? We'll sort through this. Okay, so anyway, there are a couple problems in chapter two, a couple problems in chapter three, and then a number off of the Excel spreadsheet. So I did spend a fair amount of time on the Excel spreadsheet, but I think that that's really, you know, important part of being able to realize just, you know, what a logical answer looks like when you're looking at compound interest. Folks like Einstein, talked about it being a wonder of the world. I'm butchering his quote, but even a fairly amazing thinker was astounded by the power of compound interest. Um, so we'll look at these particular examples. Um, First, let me start with the Excel spreadsheet thing. The parameters in here, it seems like if I move that mouse away from that slide, it disappears, so I'm not going to fight it anymore. But anyway, um, what we're looking at here is somebody, rather than the chart was designed, or can go as low as somebody is age 18 starting their investing program. At this point, for this problem, the person starts at age 24. What kind of effect does that have on their savings? And we're looking at the 10% rate. So let's look at this chart. And if you remember, the example I used was somebody starting at age 18, putting away 5,500 bucks per year, 6,500 after age 55 or whatever. Um, the reason why this amount is so high is because this person started at age 18. This person only delays till age 24, which is typically after college. Fair enough, but look what happens to the amount. It goes down to just shy of 3 million bucks, which is good money, but by delaying, just those 5, 6 years, um, it almost not quite cuts it in half. I mean, it's still phenomenal, but the power of compound interest is really the power of time to work on that money, and the fact that you know this money that's being this difference in money was what 30,000, 5,500 per year times five, whatever, somewhere in the 25,000 to 35,000 range, and it ends up being millions of dollars of difference. So that's what I was trying to illustrate on that. So the answer to this one, not that difficult. You're just going to look in this chart. You know, age 24. I'm on the 10% chart, and bada bang, the guy ends up with just shy of 3 million bucks. Still great. But look what happens if you delay till age 30. You know, I got all my college loans to pay off. Oh, I got this expense, that expense. Now you're down to less than $1 million if you start at age 41. Well, half $1 million. So that's my point is get your finances in order early, become disciplined about saving. You don't have to put down, hundreds of thousands of dollars. We're talking literally a 20th of that. We're talking 5,500, 5,000 bucks, and you're able to do great things with it because you're giving it a great deal of time to work on that. So that was the point of that problem, was trying to impress upon you again the power of compound interest. Now the next ones are a little more straightforward. But what I don't want you to get wrapped up in is thinking that, there's only one way to get the answer, and that you have to, do some sort of magic to get the answer here. Actually, I'm showing you a whole bunch of the homework, so let me get that back under control. Okay, so which ones are we looking at? 2, 6, and 10. So we showed that one Excel spreadsheet that came out with that 2.9. Here are the other numbers, and I'll let you work through them, but now you've got a bit of a hint. And when you look at all these numbers, this is certainly one way of doing it, but you could also open up something on your computer and look at present value tables or something like that. And rather than be tables, of course, it'd be, just a drop down menu, or you could put it into a calculator. Uh, you're trying to prepare yourself for the real world, and these tabular data things they're getting to be a bit archaic. People calculate. There's still a definite need for the concept of present value and future value um, calculations, but memorizing a bunch of acronyms is not necessarily something that's going to stick with you, and not necessarily something you're going to use later in life. So this should provide, a pretty good start. So FVA, future value of annuity. Annuity is a series of payments. So as opposed to, I give you $100 and how much does it generate over 20 years? No, if it's an annuity, I give you a series of equal payments. So, but FV is future value. And the rest of it, the asterisk denotes a multiplication sign, as you guys know. But with this logic, go back and work through the problems. But don't feel, because you're not going to have this on the exam per se. I'm not going to give you a future value or whatever type of thing. You're not going to have to pull this out of the chart for the test. But at some point in your life, you are going to want to know, hey, I want to buy a house in whatever number of years. How much money do I need to start setting aside? Or whatever, you can do these calculations backwards or forwards, present values and future values, but having this information um, available is quite useful. And if you're not cheating by going to a computer and typing in a future value calculator or something for you, and not have to go to the tables, because that's the way you're going to do it in real life. In the old days, realtors would always have on their business cards, they would have these charts on the back so they could make these calculations. And it was basically because they had to, because they didn't have the scientific calculators, and now even those kind of calculators for this type of stuff are obsolete. People go into some sort of drop down menu on an application on a computer. So, but these are the answers you're looking for. 3306, 1728, and that 300 on the first one, and then the big number on the bottom. So give that homework another try, and we'll review through. And if you're still a little confused, don't sweat it, because we are going to talk about present values and future values in this assignment. So my apologies for kind of getting ahead of ourselves. And don't worry about, that you got to get the homework done, you know, last week or whatever. You have to have it done before we take the corresponding exam. So before we take the first midterm, you have to have all that homework done, and then you hand it in as a block assignment on Blackboard. And as long as we're on that, you hand it in whatever format you want. Again, it's about learning how to do it. So, my goal is not to have you, try and figure out how to plug it all in an Excel spreadsheet or make it look pretty in a Word document or PDF or whatever. I routinely get, you know, pictures from somebody's phone of the calculations they've done by hand, and whatever. This isn't I'm sure you're all capable of you know making spreadsheets and doing all that stuff, but that's not really a personal finance task. This what I'm trying to limit this to is stuff that definitely has an application. So the format you turn it in is not a big deal. Um, so cash flow statements. We'll get to the personal, or we'll get to the present value, future value kind of stuff here in a while. But we're going to talk about some other aspects of cash flow statements, budgeting, other things. Some of these documents you may think that you don't deal with them on a regular basis, but believe me, in applying for a loan or trying to start a new business or trying to do a lot of things, and it could be your business or the company you're working for, type of business. Financial institutions, when they're comparing data or when they're assessing you for your credit worthiness or your ability to, start and maintain a business, they're going to require these sort of documents from you. And because they want to see, your capability and, your resources available and all that to operate. These things can also be used by you personally, just like a bank is doing this to kind of take an assessment of your finances. You can use this personally to uh, you know make an accounting of your situation. And then when you apply for a loan or you start a business or something, you've already got more or less a template. And rather than having to create it from anew, you can just use your numbers or type it into their format and get it done. So anyway, a cash flow statement. So this is going to be focused on liquidity. Remember, we talked about liquidity is not just the ability to have money. I mean, somebody who's got a $1 million piece of property, um, they may not be able to generate cash flow to survive, to meet their payroll if they've got a business, or pay their rent, or do the rest, obviously, or make their payments if they don't own the property outright. So cash flow is important, and it has to do with inflows and outflows, obviously flows. Salaries, interest, dividends, so those would be inflows. Outflows would be all the expenses. So again, this is a weird year with the taxes and stuff, but I've got, probably a 9-page Excel spreadsheet with all the inflows and outflows, and I have to turn it over to the people who help me with the taxes. And I've been doing my own taxes for my entire life, but now that I've got multiple LLCs and a holding company, and what I do is I do it myself, and then I also take it to a person who used to work for the IRS who kind of knows whatever. You have to admit that you may not know everything, and if somebody else can save me money, I'm not um, whatever. I'm not embarrassed to admit it and get a second opinion. So anyway, for all those details, she wants all these forms from me, and anyway, that's why these things are important. Revenues and expenses over a period of time. Another side too, one thing that makes it very easy for me is I use a business credit card for just about everything. And everything I do is pretty much business related. The only things I own are the clothes in my closet and the food in my refrigerator. Everything else is a business expense. So um, I'm kind of running at the ragged edge of that. But anyway, net cash flows, cash inflows minus cash outflows. So hopefully that is a positive number, or you're not going to be in business very long. Um, so here, just on a small scale, you know, this is the person's disposable income uh, after taxes and any other money that would be added in, and then the outflows, and then the net cash flow at the end. So this is essentially a budget. Now, arguably, I would, say that where is the savings in here? The retirement. Um, Probably realistically, if you said 10% for savings, then your what do you call it? Your net cash available would be 150 bucks. But anyway, kind of splitting hairs, especially when you're allocating 600 to recreation. And anyway, you might want to split that up more. But anyway, so one way of doing a budget. Um, Stage in your career life, college, retirement, obviously, type of skill, and the number of earners, and then the outflow, size of family, age, personal consumption. But especially when they're talking to this, when they're involved in a family, you've got another person involved, may or may not be working. Something like a budget with certain figures can definitely relieve a little bit of stress. This is the way they say it should work. But again, so many of the students are non-traditional careers. Sometimes you decide, how that career sucks, and you've hopefully been saving for your retirement, and you say, you know what, I'm just going to take a break. I'm going to take a lower paying job. I'm going to do some retraining, and then maybe it's going to go back up again. And then retirement. Where are you setting this, and based upon what? I don't know. I think people age quite a bit faster when they actually retire. Um, but if you're doing a job you absolutely dislike, yeah, then you're going to have a date like this. But this may actually be a career change for a lot of folks. But anyway, this is sort of the, you know, 1950s Ozzie and Harriet version of how people's income works. Create a budget. So again, you're forecasting cash flows and anticipating surpluses and deficiencies. You know, for me, I sort of started with the budget to come up with some ideas, but after that, I find it much more useful now to do more of a review and because I kind of know what my expenses are, and instead of doing a budget, if I end up starting to run short, I'll look back and see what happened. And this is also very useful because if you're paying for things with credit cards and the rest of that and all the security issues, you definitely have to review because sometimes there's fraud, sometimes there's just mistakes, but you definitely have to be on it. And if you let it go, well, if you let it go over a month, the financial institutions, even if it's their fault, they're very hard to deal with in terms of correcting a mistake. But if you catch it within a day or two, everything's very pleasant. And the fact is, they haven't actually paid out the merchant. If I take a credit card for somebody, I don't get that money for a couple 3 days. And if there was a mistake in there, if the bank hasn't paid it out, Mastercard or whoever hasn't paid it out, they're quite happy to deal with you then. But their propensity definitely they definitely get more difficult as time goes on. And then there's certain legal requirements for them that go away if you haven't caught it within 30 days. So make sure you're on top of that. So here she is. This is the Stephanie. She's reviewing her budget, looking at the numbers, and something happened, right? So her expenses, um, that's normal. Yep, and healthcare and insurance expenses, which is kind of odd, but if you're uninsured, not odd at all. Or if you've got a huge deductible, which a lot of people have now, the deductibles, the reason you have insurance is to prevent huge, expected costs, but sometimes the deductibles now are huge and often unexpected. And then her car probably broke. So again, pretty minor breakage though. Maybe it's just a deductible, but 300 bucks more. But if she had that savings sort of, nest egg, she could have drawn upon it. So let's say you're starting a savings plan and you're gonna, again, it's labeled as retirement, but let's just say pick a number, 5, 6,000 bucks. Before it starts going in some sort of permanent retirement account, it goes in sort of a nest egg kind of account, an emergency fund that's used for getting you through these months of unusual things. So you still put your 10%, your 250 bucks in this case, away for savings, but in a month like this, you would draw some money out of your emergency fund to cover these expenses. And so again, not living paycheck to paycheck has great, great benefits. So she's down the money, like we said. Now, there's things you can do in the short run. You can also perhaps modify the other side, sell things, work overtime, do other stuff, but those are kind of short run fixes. What you don't want to have happen is have a perpetual situation where you're living beyond your means and you're always in a negative situation and your credit card is getting, your balance is getting higher and higher and obviously your interest rates are getting higher and higher. Now you're in the, sort of a death spiral. That's what you want to catch. Anticipating cash shortages. So checking account. I would not keep that emergency fund in the checking account. That's kind of vulnerable. But you can get a fund, a money market fund or something with a brokerage, and we'll talk about brokerages and all that stuff later on. But something that it's a little bit more of a hassle to get the money. It might take you 3 days or so to get the transfer done, but that's perfectly fine because what would happen in this case, let's say it's the car issue. You put it on the credit card, and now you got until the credit card is due to transfer that money out of your emergency fund and pay off your credit card. You always, I know this is difficult, but you always want to keep your credit card balance at zero. You want to be a convenience user. It doesn't have to be at zero all the time, but before that billing date comes out, it needs to be down at zero, or else you will get hammered with the interest rates. There's two types of people who use credit cards. There's the people that the credit card people like that pay all the interest, and there's what they call convenience users, people who don't carry a balance. And so you want to seek to be one of those, convenience users because if you're using a credit card to borrow money, that's not a good situation. The credit card rates are astronomical compared to other means, so don't do that. Assessing the accuracy and then adjustment may be necessary. But again, if you're, I've, there's nothing fun about micromanaging a budget, and especially when the numbers aren't good. And just don't get yourself into a situation where you're, again, living from paycheck to paycheck. This ought to be sort of a reasonable task and not a constant battle. And you can do that by not, um, overextending your stuff on things that you want rather than things you need. So, forecast net cash flow over several months. Yep. Seasonal expenses, unexpected. My parents, I mean, they had like 6 kids and they had what they called a Christmas fund or whatever. And was actually set up with a bank. This was kind of an old school thing, but they put whatever amount of money in it. And so when Christmas came, Christmas was a big deal around our house. And um, anyway, we were still able to have a good Christmas because it wasn't a last minute December expense. No, it had been paid for throughout the year. So if especially here in Alaska, if you know your income is maybe seasonal, or heating expenses are huge in the summer and not so much in the or huge in the winter, not so much in the summer, and recreation is high in that. Anyway, you can figure these things out over time and try and forecast for it. Here she is again. So again, looking at her budget. It's really hard to forecast some of these things, though. I appreciate that. Internet, yeah, that's probably pretty easy. I think for most of us, that's fixed. Rent should be fixed. Um, Healthcare, hopefully, right now our system is not good. And if you have huge deductibles, yeah, that can be a killer. I don't really have a clothing budget, but if you saw the way I dressed, you'd probably go, yeah, makes sense. Car expenses, insurance, not too variable. But this big chunk of recreation, that's just kind of hard to figure out how you would do that because I don't tend to take monthly trips. I tend to take, big trips every once in a while. Maybe he's putting it into a fund or she's putting it into a fund and using it like that Christmas fund I was talking about, which is cool. Travel is important, you know, and not being able to do it because you're broke, but you got a brand new car that's depreciating faster than whatever. That's you've got your priorities all checked up. Judgmental. Improving the budget. So see how it's working. Don't become overly dependent on others. Yeah, that only lasts so long. People do not want your dependency. Um, anyway, create a budget and stay within it, and hopefully get to the point where you kind of know. I, I sell. Uh, well, not so much anymore, but in the campgrounds, kind of that's a fixed expense, not a big deal. But um, on some of the horse equipment, I take credit cards, but I prefer to take cash or check because I don't have to pay, 3% like I do on the credit cards. I have to pay 3% right off the top. But you get pretty good at sizing up people when they're kind of on the fence. And let's say they're spending about 3,000 bucks on something, and they're asking whether they should use a credit card or a check. And there's a bit of strategy if they've already dead set on the amount of equipment they're getting. I'll try to encourage them for cash or check. But if it looks like they're on the fence, I'll say, "Oh no, credit card's fine," which usually leads to a four or $5,000 order because it's not real money to them and they tend to spend more. So again, businesses that say, "Oh, we don't do credit cards or we charge you that surcharge," I think that's kind of short-sighted. I mean, I'm not trying to kill people's credit and encourage them to live beyond their means, but if they're going to do it with somebody, why not my business? And giddy up, they'll spend a fortune on a credit card because they don't view it as real money, and that's just human nature. And don't fall into that trap. Um, what's she doing now? So her budget, she's annualizing it, and so some of those little blips should sort of normalize. But again, whatever. Stephanie is where's her money being, you know, for this emergency fund? Where's her long-term savings, which is kind of the same thing? The emergency fund, in my mind, would be, let's just tell her what it should be here. It should be about 10%, right? Maybe 20 later in life, But if you can do the beautiful thing about using a percentage is it's um, not that difficult. But if you I would say really at a minimum strive for 10%. But if she did that and she was, setting aside 250 bucks a month and she built that up to 6,000 bucks in this other fund, not something that not some, recreation fund. This is a fund for bona fide emergencies. And then once that 6,000 was built, and I would actually have it with a different company in a brokerage account. And once I got to 6 grand, I would start skimming that money off the top and putting that into long-term investments that are not liquid and that are actually probably tied to some sort of retirement situation where I'm getting the tax benefits of investing for the long term. And so she would, she would be set. She would have her emergency fund, and she would also have her savings plan established. And she would have the discipline not to raid that emergency fund for, you know, frivolous expenses. And the truth is, when you do it that way, that 10%, you end up just, you don't view it as this money burning hole in your pocket. You end up learning a little bit of discipline. You end up learning to do without that 250 bucks. And then if you truly have some extra money here, this is actually, money that you can use for something extra, add it back into your recreation fund or do something fun with it because you've taken care of your basics. So a lot of sites out there. I'm not going to give you huge opinions, but you all know, your personal data. If you sign up with Mint, and this is great because it's all free and this is perfect, and wow, I wonder how they can do this for free. Well, they're selling your data, which whatever, it's a trade-off. I don't have, secrets to hide, but just the same, don't be surprised when you start getting spammed by other companies and financial related services who know basically how much money you got and the rest of it. And it's just a trade off. Nothing's free. Mint is you're not paying them in money, but you're paying them with them being able to access your data. And in the extreme case, if they get hacked and you gave them good data, it could, you know, cause some problems for you. But again, I've had so much in terms of people getting my credit card number various ways, and because I review it, on a semi-frequent basis, I've always got the money back. So don't be too paranoid about that. And I don't keep, stacks of cash in a checking account. I keep it in a brokerage account or something like that without, easy access to it by other folks. Very few transactions on those accounts. Any kind of fraud would be immediately detected. So, and granted, if you want to pull money out of there, you might have to go through some hassle of, two-factor identification or something like that. Or my Bitcoin accounts, I've got them in a vault where, I can't even get money out of there for like 3 days or something like that. I'm willing to trade that off to that, trade off that liquidity to have some security with it. But anyway, so personal balance sheet. This gets into assets, so it doesn't really say how quickly you're going to be able to meet your bills. Nothing about liquidity on here. Just assets minus liabilities. Financial position at a specific point in time. So you're going to meet some people in your life that are like all in on real estate, and they can't afford to eat. They can't afford to go out and do things with you because they're house poor. So you can take it too far to the other extreme, and those people would be basically suffering from a lack of liquidity. They've got maybe on a balance sheet they might look all right, but they might not even look all right. They may owe tremendous amounts of money, which would be a liability, not an asset. Anyway, assets. Liquid assets are the ones you can get quickly, right? Household assets. A lot of these things are things that you can't really turn into cash. So you can count up a car, a home, some things like that. But trying to sell furniture, where are you going to sell it on Craigslist or, Facebook Marketplace? You're not going to be getting top dollar probably, or it's going to take some time. So I certainly wouldn't consider that, obviously it's not in the liquid category. Stocks and bonds, we'll talk more about that. I have all kinds of stocks. I have virtually no bonds at this point because it's not a good financial time for bonds, but we'll talk more about that. Mutual funds are typically the same as stocks. It's just a group of stocks put into a fund to make them more manageable and provide you a little bit of diversity, a lot of good things. Nothing wrong with mutual funds, but they're funds typically comprised of stocks. They can have bonds in them as well, but I'd say 95, 98% of them are stocks. And then real estate, great investment, gives you a nice place to live, perhaps, or vacation on. Definitely not liquid. Um, and you may have some, tenant hassles and the rest of that. So, but usually a combination of portfolio is what you're, kind of looking for. Um, so liabilities, what you owe. Current ones due within a year. You're going to find that pretty much in personal finance, when they talk short term, they talk current, they talk anything that implies, a time frame. That 1 year is typically the time frame they're looking at. Long term, over a year. If you get a huge windfall in terms of making some money in the stock market and you sell it real quick and you sell it within a year, that's going to be short-term capital gains, short-term gain, and it's going to get taxed at a probably double the rate of a long-term capital gain, which is over a year. So anyway, if you're thinking short or long-term in personal finance or IRS terms, it's typically 1 year. And net worth is the difference between what you own and what you owe. So personal balance sheet, you could do that. I mean, it's not hard. You've got kind of the data we talked about, um, what you need to do that, what the factors would be. All right. Um, Same woman. Now she's got some stocks. Where'd you get the money for those stocks? We didn't see you budgeted for it, but anyway, somehow they just appeared. I'm not faulting her, but anyway, she could have been saving for those. Um, Current liabilities. So credit card balance of $2,000. Yeah, if you're carrying that month to month, you know, not good. I had a credit card that I was out there. I, this was less than a year ago. They kept sending me, deluging me with mail, with zero interest and a rollover thing. And I needed a piece of equipment. It was like 10 grand. So I bought it with a credit card and put it on there and used their zero interest till that ran out. It was like 18 months, I think they gave me. And then boom, I rolled it on another card. And I wasn't paying a dime of interest. And it had been going on for a few years like that. But with the COVID thing, those credit card offers kind of disappeared. And so now I had to come up with that cash because I had been paying, a little bit on it. It was down to about 7 grand, but all of a sudden they started charging me interest and that's $100 a month. It's like, screw that. So I had to scrape together 7 grand and pay it off just to be done with it because you do not want to be, using credit cards to finance large items or carrying a huge balance on your credit card or really any balance. If you're going to have a loan, but don't use the credit card as the loan vehicle. Changes personal balance sheet. So, yep. Cars on balance sheets. Cars are such a crappy investment that, yeah. I mean, unless it's an old Corvette or something cool that is fully depreciated out and may be appreciating. That's a different thing. But a brand new car, you really don't want to. Well, you should look at how much that thing is depreciated, what it's worth, just after you drive it off the showroom floor, and then how quickly it drops. Again, some of those things are a necessity, but make sure you keep it in the necessity category rather than the wants kind of category. Um, so here she's going to buy a car. Furniture, stocks. So anyway, given her income and everything else, dropping 20 grand on a car, I'm not driving a $20,000 car. I need to get out of the Jetta, but I'm not going to drop 20 grand on a. I've got excavators that are worth triple that, but not cars. Current liabilities. So there she is, the credit card balance carrying that. Now, see, if you had a 2,000 bucks on a mortgage, I would not falter at all because she's controlling some real estate with that. She's probably paying about 3% or so on a mortgage as opposed to 20% on that. Car loans, sometimes there's some incentives to take the loan. They'll have some artificially low rate. But credit card rate, and I'm talking, it's probably been 30 years, I guess. There used to be tax deductibility with credit cards on the interest. That still applies to mortgages, but not on credit cards. So don't do credit card debt. Impact of the economy. Yeah, some of these things are factors out of our control. But again, there's things you can do that you can control, like having that emergency fund set up. Strong economic conditions, weak demand. Everything's supply and demand, and sometimes you hear people talk about a buyer's market and a housing market and a seller's market. And when there's a lot of demand, prices tend to go up. And if there's no demand, prices tend to fall. And some of that has to do with interest rates because people are not on the edge. But we'll look at some comparisons between becoming a buyer and continuing to rent, and it's uh, changes drastically. But the real estate lobby is pretty powerful. The tax codes are pretty favorable towards buying. Plus, just quality of life issues like being able to have pets without issues and being able just to have a little bit more control is nice. But wealth is built using net cash flows to invest in assets without increasing liabilities. Uh, yes, net cash flows can be used to decrease liabilities. Value of asset increases or decreases, certainly. So the stock market's still, in spite of what people are talking about with the economy, it's still raging if people are not involved in the market. And there's only a small percentage of actual people involved in the market. But I mean, if I was only getting 10%, I would be upset. I mean, most people are getting well more than that, way more than that. Net cash flows. So inflows, outflows. So this is pretty straightforward. So by having that sheet, you can, kind of keep track of things. And maybe it'll convince you, when you put that new truck on the asset list and you see the value of it dropping like a rock and you see the amount of money you're spending on it, maybe it'll lead to modifying your behavior and getting you to invest more money um, in the long run. Liquidity ratio, go figure. Higher liquidity ratio, greater liquidity. Debt level, debt to asset ratio. But I, the one thing I don't like about this is if somebody has, 20,000 in mortgage debt, that's not necessarily a bad thing. If somebody has 20,000 in credit card debt, that's a horrible thing. So, you have to look at the type of debt. What's it in? Is it in an appreciating asset? If I'm buying, let's say I'm buying a $300,000 house and I've got it, secured with 3% loan, but real estate's going up, say 5% per year. So I'm paying 3% for the money, and the real estate's going up by 5%. And oh, by the way, I might get a tax benefit out of this. Um, you know, the fact that I've got that debt is making me 2% per year. So I mean, there's the rich people use credit. They definitely do. If let's look at the example of somebody saying, "Well, I want to buy a house, but I want to pay cash for it." And my dream house right now is 500,000, but I can't afford that. I've got 250,000. So I buy that $250,000 home and I sit on it, and it's not a great home, but sure enough, after a number of years, it appreciates to 500,000, and now I want to buy that dream house. Well, that $500,000 dream house you want to buy is now $1 million, and your mediocre home is only worth 500,000. You started out way back when 250,000 behind. Now you're 500,000 behind. You gotta, if you gotta, there's a lot more moving parts than um, anyway, just debt ratios. So it's not only how much debt, but it's the quality of debt and the rate that it's being paid at. Savings rate. So what percent you're putting in there. A lot of people will save perhaps 20% because that's kind of where if you're making 100 grand, that's where the 401ks and those things you start to max them out. Um, but those rates change all the time. But anyway, and then you have employer programs where perhaps there's a match involved. That will definitely affect your savings rate. If you're not contributing enough to catch that match, you're foolish. You're giving money away. You're working for less than you should. So anyway, that's a little bit about that. Little budgeting stuff. Some of those personal sheets that you may find useful in your personal life, but banks will certainly find useful if you ever want to apply for a loan or start a business and the rest of that. But the important takeaways are there's a difference between cash flows and liquidity, the ability to meet current requirements being, daily requirements or certainly requirements under a year. And then there's that long-term net worth, which is assets and liabilities, and they're kind of two different things. Okay, time value concepts. Now we're getting into that future value, present value, the rest of that. So this is where the book sort of introduces those charts that I introduced, on the first night, because I think it is that important. This is really the crux of anything, when they talk about credit cards in here, when they talk about real estate in here, all these subsequent chapters, everything, if you don't understand compound interest and what it can do for you or do against you, then you're missing it. So anyway, the value of money is influenced by time it's received. If somebody wants to give me $100 today or $100 next year, I will take the $100 today, right? Because you can invest it and you can end up with more than $100 a year from now. The earlier you start saving. So again, they're saying all the right things, but the magnitude, you really need to look at those charts to realize just how quickly that works. So this is what I was talking about remember I talked about an annuity. Annuity is a series of payments, or in this case, this is not an annuity, this is a single amount. So single amounts and annuities. So two different charts, two different kind of concepts. Annuity is a series of payments. So annuity, $50 deposit in the savings account every month. Compounding. That's where things happen. So what happens here? Like, let's say somebody gives me $100 and I'm getting, 5% compounded interest. And let's say it's compounded daily. So what they do is they get, 365 days, and, you divide 5% by that. So you come with some fractional percentage. But what that means is that on day one, I have $100. On day two, I have $100 plus that 1/365th of 5%. And so I'm earning interest on that increased amount. And day two, I'm earning an increased amount. So let's say over a course of a year, it's not going to be that dramatic. But if somebody paid me simple interest, just means, 5% at the end of the year, I would have $105. If somebody pays me, 5% compounded, well, because of all that fractional accruing that takes place over the year, I might have 106, 107, $110. Anyway, you have to look in the charts to figure it out. But over time, the fact that you're earning interest on interest is compounding. That's what compounding means. And so that's why the numbers get up astronomically high given time to work. So this is where they get wrapped up in these acronyms that I probably could have given you last week, but the book, mentions them. But anyway, FVIF, future value interest factor. And I'm not I'm just not a big proponent of pulling factors out of charts and it's magic because they're not that intuitive. You get just as much out of it using a calculator or using a computer to calculate it. But it's the concept is what's important. I is always going to be the interest rate, little I. N is always going to be the time period. And so you've got enough to work through those problems now. But more important than the problems is just the concept of how it works, right? PV is always going to be present value, and you go with that. All right. Future value, here's what he's doing. So in 5 years, what your money will be worth. So given that factor, it's going to be worth, 6,085. Now, all these charts are going to be slightly different depending on how you calculate it. And that's what they're trying to express there. All right. Impact of a longer number. So the n increases, the numbers go up. Impact of a higher interest rate, obviously higher factor. But as the time starts to stretch out, you get up to 20 years. Now we're talking real money. Invested 5 grand, and now all of a sudden it's worth 28. Now you're seeing how the effect over time is, and again, their charts are, dare I say, weak compared to the Excel spreadsheet. Power of compounding, and it works the same on debt. You're paying interest on not only the principal, but you're also paying it on the debt. Now, again, with a house, this gets kind of extreme too, because you typically have a 30-year mortgage. And they say, oh, over the course of the, term, this $300,000 house, you're actually going to be having paid $900,000 for it. Well, 30 years is a long time. 30 years ago, I could have, bought a Big Mac for $1. 30 years from now, a Big Mac will probably be $50. So again, you have to look at the effect of inflation on those numbers. Postpone his debt as long as possible. Again, you got to give me an interest rate here. I'm not going to make a blanket answer when they're not telling me what the debt is. If I'm paying 3% on a loan and I'm earning 5% on the asset, I'll let it roll. I'll get that money rather than double up on my mortgage payments. I'll double up on the stock market. I mean, that's how people get ahead. So you have to take everything, and you actually have to have a certain appetite for risk to do that. But people who get ahead, sometimes they get very far behind as well. But anyway, we're all rational people. You can make your own choices. Discounting, that's going back to the present. So you say, I got $5,000, in the future. What did I need to start that money? So it's just a fancy term for nothing. Present values, we're going to ignore. I don't know if you can hear that phone in the background, but it's not bothering me. Present values tell you the amount to invest today, a certain amount in the future. So this might be useful if you're trying to save up for a down payment, something like that. Anyway, and the amount based on some interest rate you could earn over that period. So if you know you need a certain amount of money in the future, you can work these numbers backwards and figure out, what amount of money you need to set aside now and what type of investment you need to put it in to get there. Again, safer is not always better, but if you're going to put it in the market and you go with 10%, bada bing, that will work. Anyway, there's a rule of 72 that's not mentioned here in the book, but it's kind of interesting, and it's very simple, but again, it illustrates compound interest. And that rule is that you say somebody's going to pay you 10% interest, and you want to know how long will it take that money that I have. Let's say I have $100, and for some reason you want to double it. How long will it take at 10% interest to double that money? And you're thinking, oh man, I need a calculator, I need a chart. If you know the rule of 72, you just divide 10 into 72, your interest rate into the rule of 72. And why 72? Because that's the magic number. It's just like one of these charts that I'm telling you not to use. But anyway, you divide that in and it's boom, 7.2 years, my money will have doubled, you know? Oh, but they're going to pay me 5%. Well, 5 into 72, obviously a much bigger number. I'm not going to do a whole bunch of math for you. 72% interest, it'll double in a year, you know? And granted, see how that compound interest worked? Because it's the rule of 72, not the rule of 100. 100%, if I give you 100% more, that would double your money. But with compound interest, it only took 72% interest to double in a year. So, anyway, fun facts. Next one. Determine the present value. Yep, money received. So it's all, you know, it's just a different way of thinking about all this stuff. But there's charts, and the school or the textbook has some of those old school charts. But again, if you want to cheat and do it on the computer and you get roughly the same answer, and that's what it is, roughly. I mean, it'll be within a few bucks, probably a few bucks more accurate. Present value, and then they slip in this bit about with a financial calculator. Now, learning how to use a financial calculator is often more involved than learning how to do it on a computer. You can certainly find the apps on any computer. So this guy needs 50,000 in 5 years, single investment today. Says he can get 7%. What's the total dollar amount? And so that's the sort of thing. 35,000 bucks now, and you can get there using all those factors. Annuity. So again, annuity is a series of payments. So rather than this lump sum up front, you're going to do a series of payments. Future value of an annuity, and boom. So, they'll always like these lottery things. Oh, they'll pay you so much, but it's over a course of years because they know, obviously you're playing the lottery, so you're not really good at math to start out with. And if they can trick you into taking some other form of payment that impresses you, then, it may even end up being the same amount of money, but it may incentivize you to play the game because you think it's tremendously more money when if you knew how annuities and present value, future value work, you realize they're not tricking me, but they're just doing a little bit of psychology with me. Same numbers. And so this stuff's all been around. The people have been needing these sorts of answers well before computers, and so what the book's showing you is that that can be done by people creating charts to get you the numbers you need. Present value, and they actually are going to use the lottery example. Financial firms will contact people. Now these guys will scam you a bit. You'll see this all the time on TVs where, oh, were you the recipient of a settlement? Do you want your money now? We'll buy it from you now for this reduced rate. And you're like, wow, that's cash now. And, they're preying upon people. But it's legal. If you did one of these present value, future value things, you'd figure out just how badly they are ripping you off. Yep, you can do the same thing with savings. Motivate you to save, perhaps. Fits within your plan. And then that homework. So same. So anyway, I hope I didn't confuse you too much. My basic whatever is you can't cheat, by calculating present values and future values using alternate means. That's not cheating. That's just the way things are done. Whatever you think you're going to have access to after this class, and I pretty much tell you it's probably not going to be one of those tables you're walking around with. Those things are fairly obsolete. Most of the time, though, when you go to one online, a lot of times they'll have all these other factors built in because they can make it even more complex. They can talk about, what the tax rate's going to be on your, it'll be tailored to, say, a real estate situation, and it'll have in, homeowners associations things, and you'll end up with a more accurate answer, but it might be a little bit more complex. But by the same token, you can also find some simplified ones that might work for the purpose of this course. But anyway, however you get those numbers, and don't sweat it too bad. You've got the examples of how to do it for the homework, and this stuff, the concepts will be on the test, but the calculations will not be on the test. Anyway, good luck, and we'll talk to you next week.